John Dickson here from the Centre for Public Christianity. Outside this triangle of skeptics, accommodators, and Christian apologists, there's another group of men and women who number in the thousands, whose works fill the academic libraries and journals of the world, and yet whose views are rarely considered in the popular discussion of the topic of Jesus. I'm talking about professional biblical historians, not professors of theology in religious institutions, which are thousands more again, but university historians who specialise in the language, literature and cultures of the biblical period. Be they Christian, Jewish or agnostic, such scholars tend to shun both the overreaching scepticism of the nouveau atheists and the theological dogma of the Christian apologists. They approach the Gospels not as zealous fabrications or divine scripture, but as texts comparable to any other from the period. All texts have blind spots and points to prove. If historians waited until they found a source with no angle at all, they'd have pretty much nothing left to work with, ancient or modern. The goal of the historian is not to discover an agenda-less source, but to analyse every single source in the light of its discernible commitment, you might say. This is how scholars read every ancient text, including the New Testament. They do not privilege the Gospels, but nor do they come to them with prejudice. Christians may be unsettled by this objective analysis of their sacred texts, but there's no comfort here for the dogmatic skeptic either. Because while mainstream scholars disagree on many things about the life of Jesus, there is a very strong consensus that the basic narrative of the Gospels is historically sound. Take the question of Jesus' existence. I know that Dawkins has his reservations, so might Onfray and Hitchens, but no one who is actually doing history has any doubt about this. Recently, I contacted 3 eminent ancient history professors and asked if they knew of any professional historian who argues that Jesus never lived. They didn't. Professor Graham Clark of the Australian National University was even happy to go on the record as saying, "Frankly, I know of no ancient historian or biblical historian who would have a twinge of doubt about the existence of a Jesus Christ. The documentary evidence," he said, "is simply overwhelming." Actually, Richard Dawkins inadvertently proves the point. In The God Delusion, his sole example of a serious historical case against the existence of Jesus is a Professor G.A. Wells of the University of London, he tells us. What Dawkins doesn't mention is that George Wells is a professor of German language, not history. That Jesus lived cannot be disputed. In addition to the plentiful Christian sources of the first century, we have 2 references to Jesus by the first century Jewish writer Josephus, one mentioned by the great Roman chronicler Tacitus, and a highly probable reference by Myra bar Serapion, a little-known Syriac writer of the first century. Now, we have a whole video dedicated to the existence of Jesus, which I encourage you to check out. From these non-Christian sources, we learn not only when and where Jesus lived and died, but also that he was a famous teacher and a famous healer. In fact, Josephus speaks of paradoxa erga, the Greek for extraordinary deeds. Now, I recently had the privilege of interviewing Professor Geza Vermesh of the University of Oxford and asked him about these intriguing words of Josephus. Now, you need to understand Vermesh is a leading biblical historian and a committed Jew. He explained what virtually everyone in the field today considers beyond historical doubt. We know with near certainty that Jesus' contemporaries found his deeds baffling. But more about this in the next instalment.